I was a Japanese nurse at the end of World War II. At that time, I was 22 years old. I was on duty at a field hospital in the suburbs of Yokohama. And every day, I saw young men being admitted with broken bodies and sunken eyes. The war was devouring our country. But even more than bombs or hunger, what terrified me most were the rumors. They were whispered in the hallways, muttered under blankets, repeated like prayers of doom. If the Americans capture you, you will be treated worse than animals. Some swore they had heard stories from Okinawa, from Saipan, from faraway islands where the tide of war had turned. According to those stories, American soldiers laughed as they dragged women away, used them for sport, humiliated them in front of each other. I remember lying awake at night, clutching the thin blanket to my chest, imagining the moment they would come for us. Death, I thought, might be merciful compared to being turned into a plaything for foreign soldiers. The word captivity did not mean being locked behind barbed wire. It meant being stripped of dignity, paraded for the amusement of men who had already destroyed our cities from the sky. By the summer of 1945, the air itself felt heavy with defeat. Every day, more neighborhoods collapsed into ash. Every week, another city disappeared under the roar of American bombers. Food became scarce. We ate watery rice gruel, sometimes roots pulled from the ground, sometimes nothing at all. Mothers sent their children to beg at train stations. Old men bartered family heirlooms for a handful of millet. And still the rumors multiplied, feeding on our despair. They'll cage us like animals. They'll make us dance for them, naked, laughing. They'll drag us out one by one until none of us is left untouched. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I only knew that my heart clenched with dread whenever I thought of capture. I imagined rough hands, jeering voices, the humiliation of being powerless before men who despised us. I tried to bury those thoughts under work, washing wounds, cleaning blood from the floor, bandaging soldiers who could no longer see or speak. But the fear never left me. When the Emperor's voice finally came over the radio, trembling and distant, announcing surrender, the entire hospital fell silent. Some women cried, some fell to the floor, clutching each other in disbelief. For me, it felt as though the air had been knocked from my lungs. The war was over, but what came next might be worse. Within days, American soldiers appeared. Their uniforms were clean, their boots heavy, their weapons gleaming. We were ordered to gather what little belongings we had and prepare to be transported. No explanations, no reassurances, just the cold certainty that we were no longer free. I remember the way my legs shook as we were herded together. We were women of different ages and backgrounds, nurses like me, typists, telephone operators, even girls barely out of school who had been working in military offices. Some carried small suitcases, others clutched nothing but a shawl. A few whispered prayers, fingering wooden rosaries or tiny charms hidden in their sleeves. Inside, we shared the same dread. None of us spoke of it openly, but it was written on every face, the fear of being mocked, degraded, or worse, used as entertainment by the soldiers who had conquered us. As we waited to be taken away, I pressed my hand against my cheek and realized I couldn't even remember the last time I had washed properly. The soot, the sweat, the exhaustion of war had clung to me for months. My skin felt rough, cracked, alien. It struck me then with painful clarity. I no longer looked like a woman, only a shadow of one. And I wondered if that would matter, if the Americans would even notice the difference when they decided what to do with us. That night, I lay on the cold ground of a crowded holding area, listening to the shuffle of boots and the low hum of voices in a language I barely understood. I thought of my mother, my younger sister, of the quiet evenings we once shared before the war had consumed everything. I imagined them somewhere under the same sky, trembling at the same rumors, terrified of the same fate. The darkness pressed down, and with it came the same question over and over again. What will they do to us? I did not fear hunger. I did not fear death. I feared being reduced to nothing but a cruel joke, a fleeting amusement for men who had already taken so much. The morning we were taken from Yokohama is burned into my memory like a scar. The air still smelled of smoke, the harbor littered with wreckage, fishing boats half sunk along the shore. American trucks rumbled into the city, their engines loud against the silence of surrender. Soldiers barked orders in English, sharp and clipped, and though I could barely understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. We were prisoners now. We were herded in groups, dozens of us at a time, down to the docks. Some women wept openly, clutching small bundles of clothes or keepsakes. Others walked stiffly, jaws clenched, as if bracing for the humiliation we all expected. I kept my head down, heart pounding in my chest, convinced that at any moment the soldiers would turn and sneer, that one of them would reach out, drag a girl by the arm, and make her scream while the others laughed. But they did not. They stood with rifles slung over their shoulders, faces expressionless, eyes scanning us as though we were just another duty to complete. That calmness unsettled me even more. The cruelty we feared was easier to hate than this silent indifference. The ship loomed ahead, an enormous steel vessel flying the American flag. Its gangway stretched like a tongue into the harbor. As we climbed aboard, boots clanging against the metal steps, I felt the weight of finality pressing down. Japan had fallen behind us, and whatever awaited us across the ocean would be our new reality. The hold of the ship was cramped, the air thick with salt and diesel. Bunks were stacked 3 high, little more than metal frames with thin mattresses. We sat in silence at first, listening to the groan of the engines as the vessel pulled away from the pier. Through a small porthole, I caught a last glimpse of my homeland, the ruins of Yokohama, blackened rooftops, the skeletons of factories, and then only the endless sea. That first night, they brought us food, trays with soft white bread, steaming coffee, and something I barely recognized, meat from a tin, salty and rich. My stomach twisted in confusion. For years, we had survived on watery gruel and scraps of vegetable stalks. This food was alien, abundant, almost mocking. Some women refused to touch it, convinced it was poisoned. Others devoured it, tears streaming down their faces as they bit into bread that melted on their tongues. I sat with the tray in my lap, staring at the strange meal. The bread was so soft that when I pressed my finger into it, it left a dent. I took a cautious bite, and the taste made my eyes sting. It was the first real bread I had eaten in years. Whispers filled the hold that night. Why are they feeding us like this? Is it a trick? Maybe they want us healthy before they humiliate us. Every theory circled back to the same dread. Eventually, we would be used. That thought clung to me like a second skin, no matter how full my stomach felt. The voyage stretched on, day after day across the Pacific. Seasickness claimed many of us. The bunks smelled of sweat and vomit, the air heavy and unkind. I spent hours lying awake, listening to the rumble of the engines and the faint chatter of guards above deck. Their voices were casual, sometimes even light-hearted, as though transporting a ship full of women was nothing more than routine. At night, when the ship grew quiet, I replayed every rumor I had ever heard. I pictured rows of soldiers waiting on the other side, leering at us as we disembarked. I imagined being lined up, forced to dance or sing, stripped of dignity for their amusement. That fear grew larger than the ocean itself, swallowing me whole in the darkness. One evening, I sat near the porthole, staring at the horizon painted in streaks of red and gold. The sea stretched endlessly, calm and merciless. I pressed my forehead to the glass and whispered a prayer I had not spoken in years. Not for survival. No, I no longer believed that survival was the best outcome. My prayer was for dignity, that somehow, some way, I would not be made into a spectacle before I died. Around me, the other women were silent, each lost in her own thoughts. Some wrote in tiny notebooks, hands trembling with every wave of the ship. Others clutched at photographs of families left behind. One girl, no more than 17, murmured over and over again, "I don't want to be touched. I don't want to be touched." Her voice haunted me long after she fell into uneasy sleep. The Americans, for their part, remained distant. They did not speak to us unless necessary. They issued food, checked the bunks, moved about with the detached efficiency of men performing a job. I could not tell if their silence was mercy or cruelty. Perhaps they were saving their laughter, their jeers, for when we reached America. Perhaps they enjoyed letting us stew in fear. And so the days dragged by, marked only by the clatter of trays and the endless rhythm of the sea. My body grew stronger with the steady meals, but my heart grew weaker under the weight of dread. Each mile carried us closer to the unknown, and with every sunrise over the Pacific, I wondered if the rumors were true. If soon I would become nothing more than an object of humiliation in the hands of men who had already taken everything else. The ocean seemed endless, but I knew it would not last forever. Sooner or later, the ship would reach the other shore. And then, I feared, the real ordeal would begin. The morning we reached America, the ship's hold buzzed with a nervous energy that none of us could shake. Word had spread that land was near. We pressed toward the narrow portholes, fighting for a glimpse, hearts hammering as if the very sight of the enemy's home would decide our fate. At first, it was only a gray outline, hazy in the mist. Then slowly, as the ship pushed closer, shapes emerged. Tall buildings, rising like monuments. Bridges stretched across glittering water. Towers that caught the morning light as though nothing in the world could ever touch them. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a land of ruins. No bomb scars marred the skyline. No smoke darkened the air. America stood intact, gleaming, untouched by war. Around me, women gasped. Some whispered in disbelief, others fell silent, their eyes wide with something between awe and despair. For years we had been told America was a place of savages, of cruelty hidden behind machines of war. Yet here it was, orderly, shining, prosperous. The contrast was unbearable. My homeland lay in ashes. This place seemed to have escaped the war entirely. As we drew near the docks, I braced myself for the spectacle. I imagined crowds jeering, soldiers lined up to mock us, maybe even drag one of us forward as entertainment for their victory. My palms grew slick with sweat as I tightened my grip on the railing. I felt every rumor, every nightmare pressing in on me. There were crowds, yes, men, women, even children gathered along the pier. Some shouted things we couldn't understand. A few spat in our direction. But there was no wild mob, no soldiers lunging at us with leering smiles. Instead, the Americans stood in rows, clipboards in hand, uniforms crisp. They barked orders, not insults. They filed us into lines, tagged our belongings, recorded our names. It was not kindness, but it was not the humiliation I had feared either. That, more than anything, unsettled me. I had prepared my heart for cruelty. I had built walls against shame. But what defense could I raise against this indifferent efficiency, this cold bureaucracy that treated us as tasks to be processed? We marched down the gangway, boots thudding on the wooden planks, the salty air stinging my face. I kept my head down, eyes fixed on the ground, terrified that if I looked up, I would meet the gaze of someone laughing at me. Yet when I risked a glance, I saw soldiers staring past us, not at us. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes already moving to the next duty. To them, we were not women to be mocked or abused. We were simply prisoners, to be counted and catalogued. The buses waiting for us were long and gray, their engines rumbling as we climbed inside. Through the windows, I saw children riding bicycles on quiet streets, houses painted white with neat porches, gardens blooming as if the war had never touched them. A little boy waved as our bus passed, his smile bright, unscarred. I turned my face away, ashamed at the envy that flared inside me. Hour after hour, the buses carried us deeper into the American heartland. The scenery rolled past, green fields, tidy towns, roads smooth and unbroken. My chest ached with every mile. Back home, bridges had collapsed into rivers, train stations lay in rubble, children coughed in shelters reeking of smoke. Here, life seemed ordinary, untouched. Some women whispered to each other, voices trembling. Is this really the land of monsters? How can they live like this while our families starve? No one had an answer. We only sat in silence, the weight of our thoughts heavier than chains. By the time we reached the camp, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Guard towers stood at the gates, but the buildings inside were painted, the paths swept clean. Barbed wire glinted in the fading light, but even that looked strangely orderly. It was not the nightmare I had expected, not the cages, not the pits of cruelty. It was something far more bewildering. When the buses stopped, we were marched out, each of us handed a numbered tag. The guards moved with brisk efficiency, scribbling notes, stamping documents. No one laughed, no one jeered. And in that silence, I felt my fear twist into something new, something harder to name. This was not the humiliation I had prepared for. It was something colder, stranger, almost worse. And as I stood in line, staring at the gates of the camp, one thought lodged in my mind, refusing to let go. If this is not the cruelty we feared, then what is waiting for us inside? They told us to line up outside a low building near the center of the camp. The sun had already dipped, and long shadows stretched across the yard. The guards didn't raise their voices, but the firmness of their gestures left no room for disobedience. We shuffled into place, clutching our belongings as if they might shield us from what was coming. The whispers spread quickly. This is it. This is where they will humiliate us. My stomach twisted into knots. Every rumor I had ever heard rushed back at once. Women stripped, laughed at, paraded like animals. Some of us had prepared ourselves for death, but this was worse. To be turned into a spectacle, to be reduced to nothing but the plaything of soldiers, was a fate I could hardly bear to imagine. As the line crept forward, the building exhaled steam into the cool evening air. I heard the hiss of pipes, the drip of water. My knees nearly gave way. I could almost hear the jeers already, see the faces of soldiers gathered to watch. When my turn came, I stepped through the doorway with my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I braced for laughter, for hands tearing at my clothes, for the roar of cruelty. But none of that came. Inside, the room was tiled, clean, almost clinical. American soldiers stood at the edges, not leering, not laughing, just watching with the detached eyes of men performing a duty. Another figure stepped forward, not a soldier, but a woman in a plain uniform. She spoke quickly in English, words I barely understood, but the motions were clear enough. She handed me a towel, and then she placed something in my palm. It was a small bottle, heavy and cool, filled with a white liquid that smelled faintly of flowers. The label bore words I could not read, but the picture was unmistakable. A woman's face, smiling, fresh. I had never seen such a thing before. "Facial cleanser," one of the women beside me whispered, her voice trembling. I stared at the bottle as if it might vanish. My fingers curled around it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. This was not humiliation. This was something I did not yet understand. They motioned us toward the showers. Warm water cascaded down from overhead pipes, steam curling into the air. I hesitated at first, convinced there must be a trick, that the cleanser would burn my skin, that the kindness was only a mask before the cruelty revealed itself. But when I rubbed the liquid onto my face, it foamed into a soft lather. The scent of flowers rose around me, delicate and unfamiliar. I felt the grime of months dissolve beneath my fingertips, the soot, the sweat, the crusted tears. The water carried it all away, leaving my skin smooth, clean, almost tender to the touch. Something inside me broke. I pressed my palms to my cheeks and began to weep. Around me, other women did the same. Some laughed nervously, as though the absurdity of it all was too much. Others sank to their knees under the shower spray, sobbing openly. For the first time in years, we were clean, not just washed, but restored. And that terrified me more than any cruelty could have. Because what did it mean that our enemy, the men we had been taught to fear as monsters, would hand us something so gentle? Why would they give us back a piece of our womanhood when we had expected them to strip it away? I caught my reflection in a small mirror mounted near the exit. My face, pink from the hot water, gleamed with a softness I had forgotten I possessed. For a moment, I did not recognize myself. I looked like the girl I had been before the war, before hunger hollowed my cheeks, before fear turned my eyes hard. I turned away quickly, ashamed of the hope that flickered inside me. Hope was dangerous. Hope could betray you. That night, lying in the barracks with damp hair spread across my pillow, I could still smell the faint floral scent clinging to my skin. The other women whispered in the dark, voices low and urgent. They gave us cleanser. They didn't laugh. They treated us like people. No one said the word out loud, but we all thought it. Why? I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and stared at the wooden rafters above me. The rumors had promised cruelty, degradation, entertainment for the victors. Instead, I had been given a towel, warm water, and a bottle of cleanser that left my skin softer than it had been in years. The contradiction gnawed at me. It would have been easier to be beaten, easier to be mocked. I knew how to fight hatred with hatred, but how could I defend myself against this strange civility, against the possibility that the enemy might not be the monsters I had believed? As sleep crept in, one thought echoed in my mind, soft and insistent. If they can wash away the dirt from my face, what else might they wash away? My hatred? My certainty? My very sense of who I am? I closed my eyes, but the question lingered, like the scent of flowers on my skin, impossible to escape. The days after that first shower blurred together, though I remember the way my skin still felt smooth each morning, as if the cleanser had left behind a reminder that the war was no longer clinging to me. We were given plain cotton clothes, sturdy shoes, and numbers to wear on tags around our necks. The uniforms of defeat, I thought, but strangely free of humiliation. Each morning began with a bell. We filed into a mess hall that smelled of coffee and butter, and the sight alone nearly unmoored me. Long tables were set with trays piled high, steaming bowls of stew, soft rolls brushed with butter, carrots and potatoes boiled until tender. The aroma was overwhelming, an assault of plenty after years of famine. I froze in the doorway the first time, unable to step forward. In my memory, meals had meant black bread laced with sawdust, watery turnip soup, perhaps a scrap of fish if one was lucky. Now here was abundance in a place I thought would strip us bare. When I sat down with my tray, I stared at the chunks of meat floating in the stew. I almost couldn't bring myself to taste it. What if it was a trap? What if generosity was just another mask before cruelty? But hunger triumphed over fear. I raised the spoon, and when the broth touched my lips, I nearly wept. It was rich, savory, warm in a way that spread through my entire body. Around me, women ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons against tin plates. Some cried openly, tears slipping into their food. One whispered, "My brothers starved in the snow, and here they feed us like this." That sentence lodged in my chest like a blade. We were not treated as guests, not exactly, but neither were we treated as animals. The guards moved up and down the rows, glancing at us with an odd detachment, as though we were simply another responsibility. Their indifference was almost harder to bear than cruelty. Cruelty I could steel myself against. Indifference made me feel invisible, unmoored. In time, I discovered the camp had a canteen. For the first few days, I couldn't bring myself to enter, but eventually curiosity pushed me through the door. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Shelves lined with goods, chocolate bars and silver wrappers, tins of jam, cigarettes stacked in neat rows, and there, among them, more bottles of facial cleanser. I stared as though I had stumbled into a dream. One woman picked up a tube of lipstick, turning it over in her hand as if it were a sacred object. Another clutched a bar of chocolate to her chest, eyes brimming with tears. When one of the guards explained, haltingly, with gestures, that we could buy these items with camp scrip earned from work, disbelief spread among us like fire. The irony was bitter. Back home, our families scavenged among ruins, boiling weeds for soup. Here, in captivity, we were offered chocolate and cosmetics. I touched a bottle of cleanser on the shelf, its glass cool against my fingers, and I thought of my sister washing her face in a cracked basin with cold, dirty water. Guilt burned hotter than hunger ever had. Letters began to arrive from Japan, scrawled on scraps of paper that had somehow survived censors. One night, a woman read hers aloud by candlelight. "We live in the cellar now. The house above us is gone. We boil weeds for supper. If you have anything, send it." Her hands shook as she folded the letter, knowing she had nothing to send back but words. When my own letter came, I held it as if it might shatter. My mother's handwriting was shaky but clear. "Your sister coughs through the night. We share one blanket. We are still alive. That is all I can say." I pressed the paper to my lips and tasted salt. Whether from my tears or the sea air, I couldn't tell. That night, I could not finish my supper. The stew that had once tasted like a miracle now tasted like betrayal. Every bite I took in captivity was a bite my family did not have. My body grew stronger, my cheeks rounder, yet the thought made me ache with shame. In the barracks, women whispered in the dark, voices trembling. Why do they feed us so well? Why give us soap, bread, cleanser, when our own leaders left us starving? The questions hung in the air, unanswered. I lay awake, fingers tracing the lines of my mother's letter, and felt something inside me shifting. The hatred I had carried for so long was fraying at the edges, unraveling under the weight of contradiction. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was confusion, deep and gnawing. To be brutalized would have been easier. To be shown kindness by the enemy was unbearable. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I whispered to myself what I could never say aloud. What if everything we believed was a lie? The routine of camp life settled into my bones before I realized it. Each morning the bell rang and we lined up for breakfast. Afterward, groups were assigned to work, some in the kitchens, some in the fields nearby, others in the laundry. I was sent to the laundry building, where rows of steaming tubs and whirring machines waited. At first I felt humiliated, scrubbing uniforms that belonged to American soldiers. Each shirt bore a name, neatly stenciled in black, a reminder of the enemy I had been taught to hate. But as the days wore on, something strange happened. I found comfort in the rhythm of the work. Soap on fabric, rinse, wring, fold. My hands grew raw, but the routine steadied me, gave me a sense of purpose. One afternoon, as I bent over a pile of damp uniforms, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished steel of a washing drum. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her cheeks were fuller, her eyes less hollow. Captivity had restored a body that war had nearly broken. The thought unsettled me so deeply that I dropped the shirt I was holding. There were moments, too, when the guard seemed almost human. One evening, during roll call, a young soldier dropped his flashlight. Instinctively, I stooped, picked it up, and handed it back. Our fingers brushed, and he gave me the smallest nod of thanks. No words, just a nod. Yet the memory lingered in my mind for days. Another time, as I worked in the laundry, a soldier walked past humming a tune. It was light, rhythmic, unfamiliar. One of the women near me laughed softly. She recognized the melody from a record she had once heard before the war. Hesitantly, she hummed along. For a few seconds, two voices, enemy and captive, blended together, fragile and strange. When the soldier realized, he stopped abruptly, embarrassed. But the moment had already etched itself into my memory. Not all encounters were so gentle. Some guards looked at us with open disdain, their eyes hard with grief for brothers lost in the Pacific. Their stares made my skin crawl, but even then, they did not touch us, did not mock us. Their hostility remained locked behind silence. The strangest days were when we were taken beyond the barbed wire for work detail. Riding in trucks through nearby towns, I pressed my forehead to the window, unable to look away. What I saw was nothing short of staggering. Shops with glass windows, displaying goods stacked to the ceiling. Children skipping rope on sidewalks, their shoes unscuffed. Men leaning against fences, reading newspapers in the evening light. And everywhere, cars gleaming under the sun, advertisements plastered on brick walls, bakeries exhaling sweet scents that made my stomach ache. For women who had left behind smoldering ruins, the sight was unbearable. Our own cities were craters and rubble, our families picking weeds for supper. Here, in the heart of the enemy's land, life went on untouched, flourished even. One afternoon, after hours of picking cotton in the fields, we were led into a church hall where local women had prepared lunch. Long tables groaned under the weight of sandwiches, fruit, and pies. My hand trembled as I reached for an apple. Its skin was red and perfect, the flesh crisp and white when I bit into it. I had not tasted fruit since 1942. Tears filled my eyes, but I forced them back, ashamed of my own weakness. Across the table, another prisoner whispered, "This is paradise." But I could not call it that. To me, it was proof of something far more painful, that everything we had believed about the enemy, about the war, about our homeland's strength, was collapsing before our eyes. That night, back in the barracks, the air was heavy with whispers. Women replayed what they had seen: the cars, the bread, the houses untouched by fire. Some were giddy, almost intoxicated by the abundance. Others stared at the floor, hollow-eyed, as if the vision of America's prosperity had been more crushing than any blow. I lay awake, staring at the rafters, my thoughts circling like restless birds. The war had promised us honor, glory, victory. Instead, it had left us starved and broken. And here, in the land we were told to hate, I had been given soap, food, and a piece of fruit sweeter than any I remembered. What unsettled me most was not cruelty. It was kindness. Kindness that I could not explain, that I could not reconcile with the image of the enemy I had carried for so long. And as I drifted toward uneasy sleep, one question gnawed at me. If the Americans are capable of this, then what does that say about us and about everything we lost? Autumn crept into the camp slowly, painting the trees beyond the wire in gold and red. The air grew crisp, the nights colder. By then, weeks had blurred into months. We had grown accustomed to the bell that woke us, the mess hall meals, the routine of work and roll call. We had even grown accustomed to the bewildering abundance, the soap, the bread, the small luxuries in the canteen that mocked the scarcity our families endured at home. But just when captivity began to feel strangely familiar, whispers started to circulate. "We will be sent back soon." At first I dismissed them as rumor, but then a guard confirmed it, his English clipped and careful. There would be transports, repatriation, a return to Japan. The news should have filled me with joy, to go home, to see my mother, to hold my sister, to walk once more on Japanese soil. Was this not what I had prayed for in the darkness of the ship's hold? And yet, as the reality sank in, my heart clenched with something closer to dread, because home no longer meant safety. Home meant rubble, hunger, disease. Home meant explaining to my family how I had grown stronger, healthier, while they wasted away. Home meant facing their eyes when they saw the roundness of my cheeks, the color in my skin, the faint scent of flowers that still clung to me from a bottle of cleanser. I began to fear returning more than I had feared being captured. One evening, after another day of work, I sat on the steps of the barracks with my diary balanced on my knees. The sky glowed with the last light of sunset, the camp quiet, except for the distant hum of insects. My hand trembled as I wrote, "I have eaten more in captivity than in all the years of war. I have washed my face with cleanser that smells of flowers, while my sister coughs in the dark. How can I return? What kind of daughter will they see when I stand before them, clean and fed? I closed the diary quickly, ashamed of my own words. But they were true. Inside the barracks, laughter rang out, women teasing each other over shades of lipstick bought with their camp scrip, trading pieces of chocolate like schoolgirls. Their voices were bright, almost carefree, as though the war had never touched them. I envied them, but I could not join them. The weight of my homeland's suffering pressed too heavily on my chest. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the small mirror mounted on the wall near the washroom. I leaned close, studying the reflection that stared back at me. My face was fuller now, my skin smooth, my hair clean and glossy. I looked younger, healthier, more alive than I had in years. And yet the eyes in the mirror were not those of a girl restored. They were haunted, torn between two truths that could not coexist. One truth was the Japan I had left behind, bombed cities, starving families, children with hollow eyes. The other truth was the America I had found in captivity. Bread, soap, facial cleanser, dignity returned in the most unexpected ways. Which was the lie? Which was the enemy? I touched my cheek, still faintly scented from the cleanser, and felt the weight of betrayal settle over me. My nation had sent me into war with promises of honor, only to abandon me to hunger and ruin. My enemy had handed me a towel, warm water, and a bottle of flowers. The realization was unbearable. When the official announcement finally came, lists of names read aloud, transports to depart at dawn, the barracks filled with a restless energy. Some women wept with relief, others whispered fears of what awaited them in Japan. I sat silently, my heart pounding with a confession I dared not speak. I feared leaving more than I feared arriving. As the morning of departure broke, frost laced the wire fences. The air bit at my skin, but inside I felt numb. We gathered in the yard, clutching our few belongings, waiting for our names to be called. When mine rang out, I stepped forward into the cold light, my legs heavy as stone. The bus engines rumbled, ready to carry us away. I climbed aboard, heart thundering, eyes fixed on the horizon that would soon bring me back to the ruins of home. And as I pressed my forehead against the glass, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. The Americans never reduced me to a joke, never made me their plaything. They gave me back a piece of myself I thought was lost. If my enemy could do that, then who was it that truly betrayed me? The bus jolted forward, and with it, my heart carried a secret I would never confess. Not to my family, not to my country, not to anyone. The secret of a bottle of cleanser that had undone me more completely than any weapon ever could.